So I've been putting a lot of thought into, hello, I've been putting a lot of thought into what is a typical abortion. A lot of pro-choicers will argue there is no such thing as a typical abortion. They're wrong. There is a typical abortion. 90% of abortions, 93% happen in the first trimester. 92, 93, depends on who you're reading. First trimester works like this. Woman finds out she's pregnant. Woman didn't want to be pregnant. Woman decides to get an abortion. She either decided immediately upon learning that she was pregnant or after taking a look around her life and saying, I don't want to have a baby at this time. Woman goes to the abortion clinic. Woman obtains the abortion. Surprisingly, a lot of people can kind of understand how that works. It makes a lot of sense. That's your average abortion. The woman didn't want to have the baby. She decided that she was going to receive an abortion. Abortions like mine are not average abortions. They're not normal abortions. Abortions like mine count like for 3.3% of abortions, but it might not even be that high of a number because I fall under the umbrella of fetal abnormality. Fetal abnormality could be a cleft palate. Fetal abnormality could be dwarfism, like that case that happened in Australia. There's a lot of different things that fall under that scope. And so I don't really know, and nobody really knows how many abortions take place under circumstances where the baby was going to die anyway. Abortions for medical reasons are kind of, well, I mean, it's medicine. It can be a lot of different things going on. But I think the Guttmacher Institute said that about 3.3% of abortions that took place at clinics were for fetal abnormalities. I think it was an additional 3.3% of abortions take place in hospitals. Mine took place in a hospital. I'm inclined to say that, it's much more likely, I'm just assuming, that an abortion taking place in a hospital is for medical reasons because it's taking place in a hospital. It's not going to be in that 90% scope of abortions where the woman just happened to find out she was pregnant, happened to not want the baby, and then went to a hospital to get an abortion. That's not really how it works. However, that's not the only reasons they might take place in hospitals. It could be that, well, I'm just leaving that open for exceptions to the rule. I'm sure there are exceptions to the rule. But no matter what, you're looking at a very slim percentage of abortions that are occurring due to fetal abnormality or medical reasons, endangerment of the life and health of the mother. And I'm not talking about the mental health, although that gets lumped in there too. It's a very small fraction of abortion procedures. The majority of abortion procedures are your typical abortion. Woman finds out she's pregnant. Woman doesn't want the baby. Woman goes and gets an abortion. Sometimes a woman can find out that she's pregnant when she's very pregnant. That's actually what happened with my husband's mother, my mother-in-law. She was very athletic, and her periods kept coming in regularly, and she didn't really think anything of it. And she was very thin and very fit. And at some point she realized that something wasn't quite right. And I think her period stopped, and she went in, and they were like, "Well, you're what, 4 or 5 months pregnant?" Which she was happy. She wanted to keep the baby, and it was my husband. But most of the time it happens in the first trimester, and people are very accepting of when a woman finds out in the first trimester and just right away, no. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. That's just how the majority of abortions happen. And if pro-choicers are telling you there is no typical abortion, that is a typical abortion. I have been trying very, very hard to understand why a woman would get your typical abortion. I want to talk about that because I don't want to be focusing entirely for the rest of forever on that tiny little sliver of the population who are getting abortions for medical reasons. Because if you're going to talk about abortion, it's not necessarily fair to focus 100% on that portion of the population. It's such a small percentage. I think it is important to give some time to that percentage of the population. Nobody else talks about people who go through circumstances like mine. And it's an out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. It's very easy to say abortions should never ever happen without looking at these cases and saying, well, except for when that's going on. And you might be very pro-life and saying, oh no, abortions should never happen, period. But tell that to a woman who's pregnant with twins and one twin is dying and their death will bring about the death of the second twin. Tell that to her, because she's going to be crying and she's going to be hysterical and she's going to be hurt and she's going to want to save her baby in any way that she can. Because one live baby is a hell of a lot better than no live babies. Occasionally, an abortion might be warranted. So, that's good and all. I think somebody needs to talk about that. God knows I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about that. I want to continue talking about that because somebody needs to talk about that. It would have been great if it was somebody who was a little bit better educated than me. I'm sure there are a lot of doctors out there who are talking about that, but nobody listens. Nobody hears them. So it might be good to broaden the scope a little bit and talk about a typical abortion. Abortions are typically divided into two categories, which is something I never knew until I had my own abortion. There are therapeutic abortions and there are elective abortions. My abortion was considered therapeutic. I saw so on the hospital paperwork, so I know. It was an abortion that took place because something had gone horribly medically wrong with the pregnancy. I think it's safe to say, I think it was a Jordan Peterson, somebody asked him about abortion. He said abortion's clearly morally wrong. And then he followed that up with, you wouldn't recommend somebody that you love have one. Something to that effect. No, I would not wish this on somebody that I love. I wouldn't want my daughters to have an abortion. I wouldn't ever want my daughters to feel they need an abortion. I wouldn't want my daughters to feel that they need an abortion for either elective or therapeutic reasons. You don't want to go through this. It's not fun. It's not fun. It doesn't feel good. It's painful. And let's not forget the fact that there's a baby that dies in all of this. It's really easy to be like, oh, it's a clump of cells. It's just a cluster of cells. A molar pregnancy is a cluster of cells. This is a baby. And at the same time, I think morally wrong, most people are only aware of elective abortions. Elective abortions, you can make a very, very safe, very reasonable argument that elective abortions are clearly morally wrong. Most people don't know about therapeutic abortions. Most people don't know why they happen or how they work or anything like that, which is why I'm talking about it. But when I first encountered the concept of therapeutic abortions versus elective and this clear divide, and it's a really clear divide, the psychological ramifications of a therapeutic abortion are not the same as they might be for an elective abortion. My baby was very definitely going to die. I'm not going to be, I've already had a situation just in the last video where I was talking about I'm 26 weeks pregnant, or I would be 26 weeks pregnant. I would be sitting around waiting for my baby to die. I'm not having those moments that I've seen a lot of women who've had abortions and talked about them describe, where they realize, it's this date. I would have a big belly right now. I would be expecting a baby right now. And it makes them cry and it hurts and it's sad, and it really just hits home that this is something that happened. For me, at some point in the future, about a year and a half from now, maybe, I'm going to look over my husband and say, he would be dead by now. He would be dead. Because that's all I had to look forward to. That was it. That was almost 100% certainty. I think the number that we came up with when we tried doing the math was 98.5%. So there was always that little lingering 1.5 that was hanging on, that, you know, he might be hanging on still. Very unlikely. And we were going to opt for hospice, which pretty well killed off that last 1.5% as well. I didn't want to do invasive procedures if the end result would not be life, or would not likely be life. You don't do that to a baby. Well, I mean, my aunt did it, but then again, her situation was different. She knew there was a chance. Well, she didn't the second time around. Regardless, you know, this is something people don't know about. It has different types of psychological ramifications. It just hits you in a different way. It's a different kind of experience. Some women who've had abortions have these moments after the abortion. You know, I would have a 9-year-old right now. My baby would be 9 years old. Me, that ain't gonna happen. Because it can't. So, and also I don't have any moral questions about it either. Like, I question it constantly because I'm thinking about it constantly, because I'm talking about abortion constantly. So I'm constantly questioning that decision, and I keep coming back to the same logical path. And it's like, I don't look at it and say, am I a bad person? You know, I don't have a moment where I realize, oh my God, it was a baby. Did I kill somebody? Yeah, no, I don't have that problem. I know what happened. Somebody died. I've watched videos where women have talked about their pregnancies, their abortions of pregnancy, and I come out of the video and I think, my goodness, I'm so glad I never had an abortion. And then I realized I did have an abortion. Darn. So yeah, they're very different things. And so when I first encountered a therapeutic abortion versus an elective abortion, I was really excited. I was like, this is huge. This is big information. This is something people need to know about. Like, people are looking at it and saying, like, things like abortion is clearly morally wrong. They're talking about elective abortions. They're not necessarily thinking about therapeutic abortions where, you know, the woman is maybe wants that baby, maybe wants a pregnancy, maybe really, maybe she decorated the nursery and picked out a name already, because that happens. And she's heartbroken, but there's not a better path that she can see ahead of her. That's not a moral thing. That's not something you can judge morally very easily. You know, there was one woman whose baby was going to suffocate to death within hours of birth. She looked at it and said, I'm not going to do that to a baby. You know, I don't want to watch, I think it was a boy, struggle and die. That's no, you can't do that. And so some of these circumstances, some of them, I mean, if you can think of something horrible and painful and nightmarish that can happen to a baby immediately after birth, chances are there is a situation, there's some sort of medical condition where, like, there was an extreme form of osteogenesis imperfecta where the bones just crumble. And yes, you feel the bones breaking. And, you know, the doctors looked at it and told the woman that, you know, her baby, they didn't actually tell her this. It was in the documentary After Tiller. The doctors had not necessarily told her that the baby would die by way of miscarriage. They had told her that he would last maybe 3 or 4 years alive. So not going to live a long life. Lots and lots of bones breaking. Bones were breaking inside the uterus. Like, the baby's bones were just being crumbled by the pressure of being inside the uterus. And, you know, they kick and they move. And the bones were breaking then. In cases, because I looked it up, I was like, what on earth is that nightmare? In cases like that, frequently the baby dies in utero. It's a stillborn baby. So she was looking forward to either A, a stillborn baby, or B, a baby that she would not be able to pick up and hold in comfort without breaking his bones. And again, that's not something that you just magically don't feel because of the wonders of being a baby. You feel it, and I don't know what they do for something like that. Like, you get to a point where it's like you just can't save somebody. And so it's a very, very different decision-making process, and it's a very different set of moral grounds to be standing on. That's a big deal. That's a big difference. And so I was like, well, this is exciting. I need to talk about this because, you know, most people, they look at the other kind of abortion, which is an elective abortion. Woman finds out she's pregnant. Woman didn't want to have the baby. Woman goes into the abortion clinic. Woman gets the abortion. Elective abortion. She elected to do this. She had a very clear choice between a healthy baby and a not healthy baby. But then I looked at it a little bit closer, and pro-life people don't like the idea of therapeutic abortions being an exception to the rule. The reason they don't like that is because of ladies like the one who was in Australia and got an abortion because her baby had dwarfism and she was threatening suicide. The life and health of the mother includes her mental health, and I think her familial health and a bunch of other kinds of health. So when it comes to that, technically any woman can get an abortion as long as she can relate it back to her health, including mental health. So threatening suicide in order to get an abortion, you know, technically you can get a therapeutic abortion if you convince people that you are suicidal. Now, was the lady in Australia suicidal? 5 different medical professionals looked at her and said that she was. I still don't understand her reasoning. I think it's a horrible reason to get an abortion. But, you know, that was her reasoning. A lot of pro-lifers look at that and say that situations like that are disgusting and upsetting because a 32-week baby died. That was a baby she could have simply given birth to and set up for adoption. Right then and there. It would have been a preemie. It was a preemie. It wasn't even a really, really preemie. It was a preemie. It was 32 weeks along. Pregnancies don't last, God, 37 weeks, 38 weeks would have been full term. So she was just right there on the edge of it. She had a healthy baby, apart from this fact that it had dwarfism. And it wasn't even, I checked the kind of dwarfism because there are different kinds. It was one of the most common kinds of dwarfism. So it wasn't like some sort of weird, I think they call it primordial dwarfism, where the baby might have died, or the baby had microcephaly, or the baby was, you know, struggling with health issues that might limit its life. Although I saw a picture of a video actually of a really, really adorable, like mini baby with type 2 primordial dwarfism, I believe. He was so cute. He was so cute. And yeah, he's gonna have some health problems, but he's gonna be able to live a normal life. You know, a relatively normal life. He's gonna be able to go to school. He's gonna be able to do all those things. He's just gonna be, you know, cute and tiny. Adorable baby, really adorable baby. But no, this case, it was a very simple thing, and technically her abortion would be counted as therapeutic because she was suicidal. And again, 5 medical professionals looked at her and said, yes, this woman is going to kill herself. For reasons, I don't know why. So I mean, a lot of pro-lifers look at the therapeutic abortion end of things and say, no, this is just women seeking excuses. This is just another excuse for an abortion. No, not always. Not always. But they do look at it in that way. I remember there was one woman who was complaining about God, I mean, technically, you can claim a therapeutic abortion for any reason that you can convince a doctor is a pressing enough reason for your health. And so a lot of pro-lifers have looked at it and said, well, there will always be doctors who are willing to help a woman get an abortion for reasons of her health that are really, really horrible reasons and horrible, there's always going to be doctors who are willing to go along with that. That's murder. Yes. I hate to be going back to that documentary after Tiller. These are the doctors that are willing to do the late term abortions. These are the four most open to abortion doctors in the United States who are really, really, they're giving out the very late abortions. They're the ones who work behind, lots and lots of security and, bulletproof glass so that they can stay protected because people try to kill them because they're killing babies. And I mean, they are ending the lives of babies. But, looking at that documentary, even they are turning people away. It's not just an, oh, I feel a little depressed kind of situation, or at least that's not the way that particular documentary, which was, I think, trying to be honest. I could be wrong. It could be solid propaganda for all I know, but it seems like they were looking at it, and the doctors themselves were talking about how they struggle to weigh the situations that women come to them with. If it's fetal abnormality, it's usually pretty easy. Hi, I'm later in my pregnancy, very late in my pregnancy, and I just found out my baby is going to die. My baby's going to die, and I'm late enough that I can't get an abortion in my state, which would have been an issue that we would have had to deal with. Turns out there is a clause in our state laws that says that, like, for therapeutic reasons, if it's something life-ending for the baby, there can be exceptions to the rule. We didn't know that until after we'd had the abortion, so we were doing the 20-week rush. Like, let's make sure this happens before we have to travel out of state to one of these 4 abortion clinics where they do procedures for women who just didn't make the deadline. But the doctors were talking about, there was one woman who was calling up, and the nurse was talking to the doctor about it and saying, this woman wants one. She's X number of weeks pregnant, pretty far along. And the doctor was like, well, is it fetal abnormality? And the woman was like, no. And she's like, tell her we can't help her. We can't help her. It's too late. Which I found to be really reassuring. Like, if you're far enough along that you can just give birth, I struggle to see anyone making a reasonable case why you shouldn't just give birth. It might be upsetting. Your relationship with the father of the child might have dissolved. I was reading one article where a woman was suicidal. She was actually suicidal in Australia again, ironically. Had a healthy baby, but she was suicidal. She had a laundry list of things that were going on wrong with her life, and she was struggling to obtain an abortion. And she was like, she was, I think, 26 weeks pregnant. She was talking with the doctors, and they were like, well, don't you know how hard it is for doctors to do a procedure like this? And she's like, well, isn't this hard for me too? And I shouldn't have been looking at that and saying, you're being selfish. I shouldn't look at that in that way. She did have a lot of things going on that were wrong with her life, a lot of things that were falling apart. Relationship with the partner had fallen apart. She had a teenage daughter who was suicidal that she had to be taken care of and needed to be keeping an eye on. She had a lot of problems going on in her life, and she herself was suicidal and contemplating suicide. So I don't doubt that she was suicidal. I struggle to empathize. Like, I mean, I do. I really struggle with that one. It's like, people have told me I'm not an empathetic person. Now, they usually tell me in a political context, like, if you don't agree with my political candidate, then you just lack empathy and that's it. It's like, empathy doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to agree with you. It just means that I can understand where you're coming from. But, you know, by that point, they, you know, blocked me on Facebook and cut off all contact after, you know, immediately telling me that I'm a horrible person who lacks empathy. But in this particular case, I struggle with empathy. Yeah, I don't get it. I don't get it. Which is another interesting point. Everybody has their things that they are more tolerant of when it comes to abortion. I thought it was really interesting that Ben Shapiro, of all people, at one point, I need to find the clip because he might want to deny it, but I don't know. At one point, he was talking with somebody, he was talking about situations where a woman is suicidal. At that point, she should be able to get an abortion. But, and I think he meant cases where a woman had been raped and was suicidal. I don't remember. Like, he was talking about cases where there was rape, and he's like, you shouldn't take that out on an innocent person. Like, just because a crime was committed against you, you shouldn't take it out on an innocent person. I want to do an entire video talking about that. But he was saying that in cases where the woman was suicidal, you know, she should be able to get an abortion then. Which I thought was interesting because I struggle with that. I struggle with that idea that, I'm not saying she shouldn't, but I'm struggling with that concept still. And honestly, I'm struggling with elective abortions. I want to talk about them. I want to do videos about them. I struggle to empathize. And so I've been looking back at my life history, my personal sexual history, and trying to get, just trying to get a clearer idea of, I mean, I was single in 20 once, you know. I was dating guys that I didn't like and didn't want to have a kid with. I remember one guy in particular. I got into a relationship with him because all our friends, we had mutual friends, all our friends thought we would be just such a great couple together. And he was a friend and I really, you know, got along well with him. So it was like, well, you know, maybe this would work. And it didn't work. I didn't like him. I didn't like the relationship. And I looked at it and it was like, I could end up pregnant if I'm sleeping with this guy. I was avoiding sex with him a lot. Like no, just, there was so much no there. And that was when, you know, you start pulling out the lies like, I have a headache. I've never done that in any other relationship, but with that one I was. And it was like, I need to get out of this thing. Because I got to the point where I started seeing isn't the right word, but I started imagining and envisioning these two phantom children who would follow me everywhere I went. You know, they were just always standing there looking at me. They wouldn't blink. They just stared at me. And one was a little boy and one was a little girl. And I remember one time I was like sitting in the kitchen, his kitchen at his house, and I was talking with him and he was cooking some food for me because I love food. And I looked over and they were just sitting there watching me. And it was like, they had this horrible look on their face. Like, how could you do this to us? And it was like, holy crap. You know, they weren't real. It wasn't like a schizophrenic episode or something. Like, they were clearly imaginary people, but they were so real to me that they were like sitting in the room with me. And it was like, I realized that there was a possibility I could get pregnant with this guy, and I couldn't stand the idea of having children with him. And at one point, like, I remember being in my car, and when I broke up with him, I was in my car. And I just couldn't stand it anymore. I called him up. I was like, I can't do this anymore. We gotta break up. And he's like, well, why? And I looked in the rearview mirror and they were sitting in the back seat of the car. And it was like, because there's no chemistry. I'm sorry, there's just no sexual chemistry. Like, that's the reason. That's all it is. There aren't two phantom children sitting in the back of my car staring at the back of my head right now. Like, they weren't real. I know they weren't real, but to me, they were. On some level, they were real. Like, there was this distinct possibility that at some point in my relationship with this man, who I really liked and I really got along with, and he was a great friend, he just wasn't a very good partner. You know, he was not, when I was single, I used to talk about how I didn't want a boyfriend, I wanted a mate. That was what I was really, really looking for. That's what I really, really wanted, and I couldn't find it for a long time. It was very frustrating. But I didn't want a boyfriend. When I was in high school, other girls would get boyfriends, and I didn't want a boyfriend. I didn't want that. I wanted a mate. I wanted somebody to really, you know, somebody I could keep. And finding that was very difficult, as I said. This guy was a boyfriend. He was a friend, and he was male, and I didn't want to have him attached to me in any way, so I broke up with him. Other women, they get into relationships with men, and I don't understand how they don't have that moment where they think, if I get pregnant with this man, am I going to want to keep the baby? Don't keep having sex with a guy if you're looking at it and saying, if I have a baby with this guy, it's going to be the most horrible, disastrous thing in the world. Like, I remember I was in a relatively long-term relationship with one guy. He was an alcoholic. He would have been a horrible father. I don't think I would have, I mean, I know that people say it's horrible and insidious when a woman gets pregnant and then just kind of scoots off and doesn't tell the guy. In that case, that might have been the preferable option. He was really alcoholic, like going downhill, starting to look like hell, not in a good place in his life, alcoholic. I don't think I would have felt nearly as, I would not have minded having a baby with him. Like, I didn't want to have a baby with him. I really didn't want to have a baby with him. He wasn't good fatherhood material. He wasn't good familial material. But on a strictly biological level, if I had gotten pregnant, would I be seeking out an abortion? No, not with that one. No. He was physically and mentally sound enough to produce a healthy baby. He wouldn't have been physically and mentally sound enough to be a father to that baby, but I wasn't necessarily looking for, if I had restricted my entire dating life to who I thought would be a good father and a good husband, I would have been single for a very, very long time. And ironically, if I had not started dating, I probably never would have met my husband. So, you know, that's not even that ironic. I mean, if you don't look, you're not going to find. But in my case, being in the dating world is what got me the connections to people and introduced me to people who eventually introduced me to my husband. And that was a long and very bizarre journey. But yeah, empathizing with women who have elective abortions. You know, if I got pregnant if I had gotten pregnant with that one guy that I broke up with because the 2 phantom children were chasing me all over the place, I don't know what I would have done. I mean, it's not like there was an abortion clinic anywhere near where I lived. And when I say near where I lived, I mean, I was in a very isolated area. There wasn't an abortion clinic anywhere. I was stuck. And I didn't exactly have the money to go traveling out to find an abortion clinic. I was stuck. And so, you know, I had to deal with the reality that if something went wrong, I was going to have a baby. And I don't know what I would have done. I think under those circumstances, I think I would have been suicidal. So maybe that's the route to empathy with the suicidal pregnant woman. It's like, you got pregnant with him, and it was him. Yeah, then I would have felt very trapped and very desperate and very frightened. But that's why I broke up with him, because I already felt that. I felt a noose tightening around my neck. You might get stuck with this guy. This one. No. So I broke up with him while I was in the car on the phone, like, hey, we can't do this anymore. And he was so mad at me. sorry. I just, no. It's not gonna work. I can't live the rest of my life with phantom children staring me down and telling me I'm doing a horrible thing. God, I wonder what it's like for women who have abortions and look back and say, my baby would have been 9, 8, 12 years old. Oh, thank God that never happened to me. That just sounds not fun. I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I don't think I have an understanding of it yet enough to say morally whether it's right or wrong. I'm just really glad it never happened to me. As a woman who had an abortion, like what, a few weeks ago, not a few, but what, 9 weeks ago, something like that. Anyway, as a woman who just had an abortion, I'm happy I didn't have that kind of an abortion. I'll talk to you guys later.